My name's Tracey Roberts, and I live in Platteville, Wisconsin. And I'm going to talk tonight about the British Hollow Smelter, and I taglined it as a cautionary tale. When I first offered this talk to Barbara, I told her that I thought the British Hollow Smelter was going to be going on the National Register of Historic Places. So I was really excited to talk to you about that tonight. But in fact, that is not what's happening. And so it means that a whole nother set of problems and circumstances have cropped up, and I wanted to share this with you. So, before I get right into the British Hollow Smelter, I can't help myself because I am a historian and I need to always give a lot of background. We will be talking about the British Hollow lead smelter in Grant County, Wisconsin, which is very near where I live. Um, and it's in a little village that is now a ghost town called British Hollow. But I want to talk for a minute first about lead mining in our area of Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa in our little tri state area. So I want to offer this little background here. I want to let you know, first of all, that Native Americans and French speakers were mining lead ore around present day Galena, Illinois before 1700. When Julien Dubuque, who we were talking about a minute ago, a French Canadian, settled near the Catfish Creek, a small tributary on the eastern shore of the Mississippi River, he found an active village led by a chief called Kettle. This Muskogee band was actively mining and trading lead. Dubuque received legal permission from the Spanish commandant in 1796 to farm and mine and do business on a large piece of prime land overlooking the Mississippi at a place that now bears his name, Dubuque, Iowa. He named his settlement the Mines of Spain because at that time, the western shore of the Mississippi at that place was under Spanish sovereignty. The more important permission, however, for him to be on that land came from the local Meskwaki leaders almost a decade earlier when they allowed Dubuque to use their land during his lifetime. Dubuque married a Métis woman named Josette. She was a French Canadian and French Canadian Meskwaki parentage. She is referred to in archival records as Madame Dubuque. Family ties were essential for doing business with Native Americans at that time. Monsieur Dubuque enlisted the labor of Meskwaki miners, Creole and French trappers, traders, and farmers. Women and men in his employ dug up ore on both sides of the Mississippi River through the late 1700s and early 1800s and continued after his death in 1810. This period saw a marked increase in lead ore production. French, British, and American traders were eager to trade with Native Americans for lead. Meskwaki and affiliated Creole miners only traded their ore on islands of the Mississippi River to keep out armed intruders from taking their mining operations. There were several accounts of bloody encounters between Native American miners and their trespassers in this period. In 1815, 20 Indian-tended lead furnaces were in operation near Galena, Illinois. The Americans were determined to force Native landholders to allow them into the district. The Treaty of 1804, which most Indians considered fraudulent, had given the U.S. government claim over the Upper Mississippi Lead Mine District, at least on paper. In addition, the federal government passed an ordinance in 1807, which reserved lead mining lands for the government arsenals. Incoming miners would be required to register their claims at the mining office and abide by many rules. In addition, they were supposed to take ore to a licensed smelter, who in turn had to fork over 10% of the ore as a tax to the government. This experiment in regulation was mostly a failure. First of all, it didn't even take effect in the Upper Mississippi Lead District until the 1820s, when an office was set up in Galena, and miners were very disgruntled by it. This program was abandoned by 1847. A turning point in this simmering contest came when Colonel Richard M. Johnson of Kentucky, supposed killer of the Indian Tecumseh at the Battle of the Thames in 1813, and his brother, Colonel James Johnson. They briefly came to Galena in 1820. By 1822, with government backing, they laid claim to the Buck Mine, a very productive vein controlled by a Meskwaki leader called the Buck. To ensure their success, the brothers used their political clout to get an order from the Secretary of War to deploy troops from Fort Edwards, Fort Armstrong, and Fort Crawford. Without the troops, the white miners didn't stand a chance of taking over the mines. The flood of newly arriving miners and their military protectors could not be stopped. Thousands of these miners looked for new leads north of the Illinois border in what was then Michigan territory and trespassed on Ho-Chunk Indian mines and farmlands. 1827 marked the year of the lead rush into southwestern, what the land that became Wisconsin. A regional militia had formed to keep Native American protest and unrest in check. After the 1832 war against Black Hawk and his band of non-cooperating Sauk Indians, Native Americans in the Lead Mine District were forced to remove from their farms, villages, and ancestral graveyards. The fraudulent 1804 treaty, the Jacksonian Indian Removal Act of 1830, and the 1832 Black Hawk War gave the U.S. government the legitimacy to move groups west of the Mississippi River in so-called unsettled lands. By the 1840s, the decade with the highest lead production, furnaces dotted the landscape, belching sulfurous gases that poisoned the land. The lead trade became more productive and industrial. Advances in smelting ore allowed for greater yields. It was in this period that the British hollow lead furnace was in full production. So this map, I just want to point out, outlines the lead district of the Upper Mississippi Lead Zinc Mine District. This is the Illinois-Wisconsin border here, and this is the Mississippi River, and Dubuque, Iowa was a big mining site. Galena, Illinois down here. Whoops, sorry. Here in Grant County near Potosi is where our lead smelter is that we're going to talk about. I live in Platteville, that's right here. And this district went all the way up to Blue Mounds and out a little bit past the Driftless, actually. So by the 1840s, we see a huge change in the amount of lead being produced in the area. This is the period when the British Hollow lead smelter furnace was in full production. It's also the period where my family put up several smelters in this area. One of my great-great-grandfather's smelters was located near a village called Lead Mine or Leadville. It had different names in Lafayette County near here. It is described as being built in the same style as the British Hollow smelter. So I've always felt a personal as well as professional affinity with the British Hollow smelter because my great-great-grandfather's smelter is gone. I found the cornerstones of that building, but the rest of it's gone. This I was lucky to obtain. This is the family's lead book from 1859. My family were called the Leakley family, and this we were able to have this come down to me, which I was really lucky this got passed to me. I thought this was fun too because it reminds us of how the British Hollow smelter would be. So you might want to read this about the Leakley smelter, the one that my family had, reading about the draft. It's kind of funny. So you go ahead and read that. So I guess I find that funny because you can imagine walking by there and just all this smoke just coming out of the ground. But that's because they had these tunneled furnaces, flues from the furnace, and they just came right out of the ground up at the top of the hills. Well, several of you may have visited the British Hollow smelter site because in 2013, the Mining History Association held the annual conference in Galena, Illinois. I bet a lot of you were there. I found these photos on the MHA website. So that was me when I was younger, my husband, and lots of friends here. And you guys heard John Bryan, who is a state archaeologist. He's recently retired at the British Hollow smelter site talking about it. And you met Alan Van Natta, the local historian who's been preserving this site for the last 3 decades, showing historic photos of the smelter. And you guys were up on there. I was there too, examining the flue. And these were all your photos. So thank you for those. The interesting thing about the British Hollow smelter is that it is a Scotch hearth or ore hearth furnace. It's a new innovation back in the day. They started out getting more popular in our area in the late 1830s. It replaced the log furnace and the reverberatory furnaces of the era as as the ore hearth or Scotch hearth furnace was more efficient, extracting about 80% of the lead on the first firing while using less fuel, and it was less complicated to build than the reverberatory. The ore hearth could be easily stopped and started as need dictated. The British Hollow site consisted of a large workroom wherein bellows driven by water power produced a blast of air to heat the fuel in the furnace boxes to a temperature over 800 degrees. The fuel used was wood charcoal, but the Scotch hearth could take coal as well. I found this example of that kind of furnace with the slag hearth and the ore hearth. And that's pretty much how the British Hollow smelter was as well. So there were two hearths in front of the workroom, a smelting hearth and a slag smelting hearth. The tours or points of the bellows pointed into the back of the smelting boxes to superheat the fire and allow the sulfur molecules to dissipate as gases. The toxic smoke went up arched chimneys to the approximately 75-foot long flue, which was a stone-lined tunnel ascending up the hillside to take the smoke away. After they fired in the first chamber, they would then put that remaining slag in the next slag furnace and extract some more lead, finally dumping the rest of the detritus. But we noticed that in many of our buildings from this period, including homes, that the lime mortar has ash in it from these furnaces. So it's really fun to look at mortar in our area. You can kind of see how they made it out of the cinders. So over the decades, the British Hollow Smelter Works was owned by a number of different parties. We call it the Craig furnace sometimes because he's the first one who shows up in the record as selling the furnace site. It was also a mill site, apparently, at that point for $1,000 in 1843. In the geological study conducted by David Dale Owen in 1839, 1840, he reported that a blast furnace at British Hollow owned by Jonathan Craig produced 1,314,000 pounds of finished lead. So this was a going concern at least from 1839. In 1843, Craig sold his furnace and mill, and then the furnace continued to be in operation from the 1840s through the 1860s. It closed and opened again briefly in the 1870s and finally made its last pig of lead in 1886. It was modeled after ore hearth furnaces used in the lead district in northern England. The well-preserved 1820 Scotch hearth smelter at Grinton Moor in North Yorkshire has some similar features, and I love this illustration because it really helps us understand the British Hollow smelter. You've got the two furnaces, the two hearths, and then the smoke going up and then into the chimney and up the flue up the hill, which was really long in this case. I can't remember. It was it's like hundreds of feet. I can't remember how many hundreds, but it shows the water coming through the overshot wheel, turning the wheel, and then turning this main shaft would push on make these bellows work to superheat these fires with the tweers. So this is a cool illustration, I think. And this is, of course, in North Yorkshire, where so many of our miners came from in our area. We often talk about Cornish miners, and yes, they're super important to our area, but these North English British folks, including my family who came in 1834, were from North Yorkshire and Durham counties in England, and they did some good work. Throughout the 20th century, unfortunately, the old British Hollow smelter site was desecrated. The area became a town dump. Teenagers stowed their beer in the ruins, and adults took the dressed stones to use on their own farms. By the 1970s, the site was touted as a tourist attraction, but by then it was pretty difficult to see the building as it was covered in vegetation and soil. The British Hollow smelter is a significant and singular example of an extant Scotch hearth lead smelting furnace, a type widely used in the Upper Mississippi Lead Mine District. We think it's the only one left in our area and perhaps in the whole country. No one's come forward to help us understand that there are more that are other ones that are in as good a shape as this one. I haven't found one in this district, and I've looked. So now we get to the part of the paper that's called the cautionary tale. So this is the part that is upsetting to me anyway. For several decades now, a handful of concerned citizens have tried to expose and stabilize the remaining chambers and features of the site. However, for many reasons, the site was not put on the historic register, an oversight with real world consequences. A leading preservationist at our site has been Alan Van Natta. Alan's family's farm is very near the site, so he was aware of it as a boy. Alan always was interested in local history, and he has a degree in history from University of Wisconsin-Platteville. Alan is friendly with the family that owns the smelter site, and they were in favor of the work he did to uncover the smelter. In 1998, in conjunction with the Potosi Township Historical Society, Alan contacted John Brian, the Wisconsin state archaeologist at the time. What a lucky happenstance that John had grown up in the Potosi area, so his family was known to the landowners and local historians, which allowed for trust to develop. Allen secured 2 grants and did much of the work with volunteers to stabilize the site. We know that Kathy Wolf, Beanie Flesh, and Harry Henderson were all very involved in this project. With many professionals at the Office of the State Archaeologist, test excavations and mapping were completed. In 2004, John wrote an extensive technical report which details the history, functions, ownership, etc. of this site since the 1830s. This is such an important resource, and we're lucky it will preserve the memory of the original site. From the late 1990s to 2020, Allen and various volunteers, myself and husband included, cleared, cleaned, and remortared seams using lime mortar mix as recommended by the Wisconsin Historical Society. However, those interested in the smelter site over the decades had families and full-time jobs, farms, and businesses, so the work proceeded in fits and starts. Allen ran out of the initial grant money to buy more mortar. My thinking's always been, well, this building's been around since, the late 1830s and it's holding up, so it'll always be there. I can help out when I have more time. Man, was I wrong. John Bryan said that some years after he published his study, he tried to get a grant for the property owners so the application to put the site on the register could be completed, but that fell through. By 2020, the property owners passed away, or passed their farm at least, on to their daughter and her husband. John tried to get an application process going again, but due to a backlog of applications at Wisconsin Historical, it would be a couple years at least before there would be any benefit for the busy farmers who own the land. Perhaps the effort wasn't worth it to them, and I understand that. In the meantime, a group of local men, with the encouragement of the Potosi Historical Society, offered to preserve the site. It had been a few years since any progress had been made, so it seemed like a breakthrough. Allen, too, encouraged the new group of volunteers. Sometime last year, the leader of the preservation team contacted John Bryan, who gave instructions on where to find the mortar recipe needed to proceed. John encouraged the team to first work on stabilizing the main mechanical room, as the hill behind it was causing damage due to pressure. He also told them to only use materials found on site, no new materials. Everyone was hoping for the best, and the enthusiasm of the new team and the strong personality of the leader seemed to bode well for progress to take place. But this was not to be a preservation project. This was to be a reconstruction project. No site plan was drawn up. No input was gathered from archaeologists, civil engineers, or historians. The team chose to ignore the advice John gave and did no work to preserve the main chamber. They were using Portland cement, which will damage the extant limestone blocks. They purchased limestone blocks from a store, used plastic pipes, and cinder blocks. The design was not compatible with the workings of a lead smelting facility. How do I know all this? Well, Alan, first of all, you can look at the pictures and see that these clearly are not old materials that are compatible with the site. So you can see the plastic and you can see all the cinder blocks up here. Alan was very concerned that the site was not being managed correctly, and he saw inappropriate materials were being used. So he called me and John to try to halt the construction work so that more folks with a vested interest could weigh in. In May, I was invited to a meeting of the Potosi Historical Society to talk about the site. I wrote up a short memo for them describing the importance of the site and the importance of preservation over reconstruction. Their society is unfortunately down to about 10 regular members and has recently at that time lost their president. The May meeting was the first for the new president, who also happened to be the reconstruction leader at the furnace. At the meeting, after some initial petty misogyny cast my way, they all agreed that it was wonderful that local citizens were again taking an active interest in doing something to preserve and interpret the over 175-year-old lead smelter. It takes a lot of money and physical effort to take on such a reconstruction project. But I asked the group to consider putting the brakes on this, which was John's recommendation, so that we could assess the project and create a comprehensive plan, enlist more expert advice, and write a grant to cover the costs. I thought I was coming in with a reasonable proposal based on facts related to preservation of historic limestone structures. I asked if they had a copy of John's comprehensive 2004 study. Someone said they didn't know where the book was, and the President Smelter project leader made it clear that he had not consulted it before starting the project. Even though I had been invited to this meeting, I found that my presence was not regarded as helpful. I could feel anger and confrontation from the leader. He insisted we needed to go to the site that very evening, and he'd show me all the great work being done. We got into our cars and headed to the smelter. The society secretary told me that they needed to complete the construction by July 4th because they wanted to have a community 4th of July event at the smelter to demonstrate that when you make a trash can fire under a chimney, the smoke goes up the flue. Sorry, I found that funny. As we looked over the site, I was able to explain the different areas of the smelting operation. The society members seemed very surprised to learn that a mill race, pond, water wheel, and bellows would have supplied the power to create a hot enough fire to process lead ore. It was clear to me that the project leader and local custodians of the site had no idea how the smelter worked. It was really disheartening. I was confronted by the project leader about my expertise in stonemasonry. I told him I was a historian and public history advocate, not a mason. I could tell a couple of folks were starting to wonder if it might be wise to follow John's advice and halt construction. But the project leader was determined to carry on. The group repeated that at least progress was being made, and the leader said numerous times that without his team's work, the building would collapse. This was disingenuous and not based on engineering principles. The weight their project has added to the main chamber is in fact damaging the building. In the meantime, the local press were touting the great progress at the site. The articles I read contained several false statements, and it was clear that when they spoke to the building team, they were not supplied with some basic information, such as the likely date the smelter shut down. It was decided that John and Alan would talk with the landowners about putting a stop to construction until a plan could be developed. At the same time, the project leader was contacting them, and my reading of the situation is that these well-intended, busy landowners felt they were being caught in the middle of a local feud. The landowners told Alan, my husband and I were there too, that they didn't want any trouble, and if this issue couldn't be resolved amicably, they would just forbid anyone from being on the site. A meeting at the smelter was called, and all parties involved showed up. The project leader stood in front of a large group with a shovel in his hand, kind of like a talking stick or something. And he told us, John, Alan, me, Kathy Wolf, anyone else who might want to put a pause on the construction, that we each had a maximum of 5 minutes to talk. The meeting was set up to be adversarial and uncomfortable. Being outside on a beastly hot day was one factor. The large circle of folks could barely hear one another, and everyone wanted to get on with it. It did not lend itself to nuanced dialogue, cooperation, or planning. It was really disappointing. Even with the presence of a state archaeologist, an engineer, and historians, the narrative about the importance of preserving a rare and important site was lost in conversation about all the work that was already done, and why didn't we rebuild it if we cared so much, and how could anyone afford to do any other than beside the cost-cutting way that they were building it. The landowners had heard enough, and they wanted no more confrontation. They decided the work team could continue their construction, convinced that that would resolve the matter and save the historic structure from collapse. The lesson here for me, and perhaps for you, is don't take your regional historic sites for granted. It sure seemed over the decades that the British Hollow Smelter site would be there for all to learn from and enjoy. In a recent letter, John commented, "Generally, it seems Americans like action. And I think that they felt any work was good work. And I think they felt they did not know what we were talking about. We lacked the real world experience, perhaps, one might need for these matters. And we were outsiders." John wrote, "I was spoken to as a local guy, either as long as I agreed with everyone or maybe to manipulate me. But it was clear my lived experience as a state archaeologist was less valuable, maybe less valid than those of some others." Alan, who committed hundreds and hundreds of hours on volunteer research work, photo scanning, social media advocacy, and hard labor to preserve the site, commented that, quote, "Projects of such historic importance must be overseen and directed by experts. Go-getters are great, but when they refuse to heed advice and do things properly, things are doomed. Thinking about how this internationally important project is being lost of legitimacy bothers me to no end." According to John, it's probable that the smelter site is no longer eligible for the state or national register of historic places. It has been so altered as to render it inauthentic. To one day take apart this new work that does not accurately represent the way the building would have looked or worked would probably do great damage to the original structure. I'm having trouble making lemonade out of lemons. I'm mad at myself for taking my eye off this project. I could have been more proactive in helping Alan by writing grants or soliciting funds or trying to get university professionals involved while I was on staff at UW-Platteville. I could have helped him develop a Friends of the British Hollow Smelter. Could have, should have, but it's too late now. Thank you for hearing my story, my very frustrating story. An historical treasure and all it can teach us has now been lost. Thank you. Barb, can you let other people talk now?
They can unmute themselves.
Okay, I'd love to hear any comments or questions.
You want to unshare your screen
Sure.
and then we can see everybody in gallery?
Sure.
There we go. Questions, comments?
Well, I'll just add a thought. I mean, it's a shame that this thing has gone the way it has. I mean, I thought this was one of the coolest sites we visited when we were there for Galena, because all of the Scotch hearths that we had in the eastern states, to my knowledge, are all long gone. And this at least could give you a really good sense of what was going on in one of these places. There are a few old pictures, but nothing that really kind of showed you the inner workings, like the British Hollow Smelter. So it's tragic.
Thank you. Thanks for seeing that, because we're pretty broken up about it.
If I might comment, I'm the one who we had some discussion on Facebook mining history thing about, or the Upper Lead, whichever, one of the website, one of the Facebook groups.
So anyway, my Facebook group is called the Lead Zinc Mining District of the Upper Mississippi River Valley. So please join me if you want to know about our area.
Yeah. So that's the one I've been commenting on. I'm the one who visited 3 of them in Yorkshire Dales back in August. And I think Langenfelds have been out there before too.
Me too, twice. Yeah.
And so it's like, oh man, it's because when we visited in 2013, I said, isn't this great? And then to see that someone has gone about it the wrong way, with good intentions, but poor knowledge. And people do resent outsiders, even though we might be try to come alongside them and be humble and not like we're not know-it-alls, but we do know a lot. And sometimes it's a matter of timing or just circumstances. You just can't make something work. We run into that in Vermont and stuff like that. It's just you sometimes you get a half a victory, half a loaf. It's better than no loaf at all. It's sometimes you just can't stop the momentum. But I applaud your efforts, and it's still a great site. I wonder if it still might be made to look better, even if it internally isn't done right or something at some point. It was interesting with the flues I saw all over Yorkshire was they didn't care what the outside of the flue looked like, but that inside lining was like perfect. I mean, it was made to have the least resistance for the hot air and fumes to go way thousands of feet up the hill to a chimney, and the outside looked awful. It might have been covered with turf or might have been open, but all they cared about was that inside, and they were working with whatever the local stone was, which is what they did at British Hollow. As they made it, it was about function, not about looks.
At least it wasn't still a cinder block, though, right?
right. Yeah, but I applaud your efforts. I've been following it. I remember back earlier in the summer when you were starting to struggle with this stuff and everything, and I was thinking, what's going on? And then now I see what's going on. I say, wow, what a mess.
Yeah. Thanks.
Johnny, just an aside on the interior surfaces of the flues, I've read in more than one historical account that they would actually, after a long run, would bank the fires in the smelter, and they'd send kids up the flues to scrape the lead fume off the sides of the flue and recover it. It must have been a horrific job, but I've read it in more than one source, so I think it has a certain amount of credibility.
Yeah, yes, I read that too, and associated with the Surrender Mill in particular, which was built in 1839, which has a double or four flues that come together in a V and then go way up the thing and all like that. And that's why I admired British Hollow with the two flues coming together. It's just so cool.
Yes. Yeah.
Any other?
Maybe just as an example of one of the eastern sites that has been totally wiped out is in Petersburg, Virginia. During the Civil War, the southern lead mines sent their ore to Petersburg, where the Confederate government built a smelter right for the part of the war effort. And when you go on the site today, you can see where the railroad siding went along the smelter site, but there is not even a piece of slag left on that site. And it's just unbelievable. The city owns most of the property, and they built a water tower on it. And I don't know whether the final destruction of the site was the responsibility of the Public Works Department or not. Very little information is available. I would imagine after the war was over and that people probably pilfered stone for rebuilding things after the war effort.
Yeah.
Pretty much like anthracite breakers. They're all gone.
Yeah, exactly. Silver Hill is definitely gone. They had a whole bank of Scotch hearths there.
Wow.
Tracey, I know that you were involved with the Grant County Historical Society. Did they play a role in this? Were they invited to play a role in this at all?
Well, what happened was long ago, because Alan Van Natta was in that area, he aligned himself with the Potosi Area Historical Society back in the 80s. So they were kind of the custodians, if you will, as a entity, as a historical society, to kind of keep up with the smelter, try to make it look better. Alan spearheaded the project. Most of his volunteers were members of that society. So Grant County Historical Society, well, I used to be the executive director there. for a couple of years, and they haven't been quite as active in mining because they're in Lancaster, so they have other stories to tell. So we hadn't told the mining stories quite the same way. So the Potosi Historical Society really was the custodians of that space, along with the private landowner who didn't really want to have much to do with it, but was more than happy to have Alan and the volunteers cleaning the place. And so it's just when the land changed hands and in the last couple of years, and then this new group came in of excited guys, oh, we're going to fix this thing. We know how to do it. We know how to lay stone. We're going to do it. But like I say, they don't have any site plans. I mean, we've asked for site plans. They don't have any. They took it. What I was told from the leader of that project is he saw a couple old photos, the ones I showed you, and he said, that's how I knew how to build it. Unfortunately, he misread the fronts of the stonework on the two furnaces because they weren't two different arches. It was the cone of the chimney going off of the top of the arch. It wasn't that there were two arches. It went like this, not, it went like this, not like this. But he saw, it was an old photo that was very grainy. And what he was seeing was a bunch of detritus at that mark. So he thought, oh, that must mean there's two of them. And that's all he had to go on was the photograph. So so in fact, I'm sure it didn't have two arches like that. It's hard to tell people things. You try to be nice and try to explain and ask, well, maybe you should talk to so-and-so. They know a lot about this. And I talked to Mark early on, Langenfeld, and said, what do you think about this and all that? And trying to get people involved through my little Facebook group. But yeah, like you say, the momentum was really strong. And the leader is a really strong personality. I mean, he's a go-getter kind of guy. He wants to get things done. And he was getting a lot of positive press. So it must have felt really good. I mean, I get it. You do a project and people notice and it feels good. And why quit now, right? Even if you're not doing it right or using the right materials or preserving the site. And that's just how people are. We love to be noticed, that's my thinking about it anyway. People like to be called out for the good things they do. Anyway, I'm pretty frustrated.
Anybody else?
Yeah, let me just ask Tracey one more thing. We see that in its recent state. What do you think is going to go on? I mean, do they have determination and wherewithal to continue what they're doing in this reconstruction?
Well, I think unless you have a strong organization behind a project like this, within 10 years, all the dirt. First of all, okay, let's back up just a little bit. There is a major chamber. We'll call it the large chamber or working room, where we would have had our bellows and we would have had mechanicals, right? In that chamber, that's the one that's up against the cliff, up against the hillside. And it's pushing that chamber, that arched chamber askew, right? That needs to be somehow, engineering work needs to be done to somehow back some of that fill out from behind there to stop the pressure on it. I mean, I'm no engineer. I'm not. This is what I've been told and what I understand. I know you guys know and gals know a lot more about this than I do. I'm not an expert. But my understanding is the first thing is to protect that major chamber because that's the one that's got the hill behind it that's pressing on it. In the meantime, they put so much weight on that chamber by trying to rebuild the furnaces and flue that go up, the two that go together and then go up into one. And that has added a lot of weight onto the top of it. That's going to hurt it. So I'm just saying, if it doesn't fall down in 20 years, which it might, if we don't do something about the back hill. Then you've got the problem of all these guys are over 70. I mean, they're older guys. And unless they've got a bunch of younger guys and gals coming up to help out, we're going to be right back where we were in 2000, where everybody was over 50 or over 60 working on it, and we were all tired. Not that I did much work there. I didn't. I helped Alan with some things, but not the physical work. I tuck pointed one day with him, and it was lovely. I mean, I really enjoyed it. So all I'm saying is, without a organization that has more than 10 people as part of their historical society, we need a dedicated British Hollow specific Friends of group that can watch that site over generations. Like, the people can pass the baton a little bit onto the younger folks. Otherwise, I don't see how it can happen. It's just going to turn into a pile of rubble again. And the work they've done is, it's not, like I say, unfortunately, it can't really be taken apart without damaging the extant stone. Because you know how limestone is. You know more, probably better than I do. It's pretty crumbly. You can't go take an old hard cement and very easily chip it away and try to start over again. And now John Brian, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. Sorry. Somebody here probably knows. He's saying he doesn't even think it's eligible any longer for the historic register. So sorry to be negative. I just can't, I can't make lemonade out of this thing. Okay. Out of these lemons. I feel like it's lost. I just don't know how to fix this. So if anybody has ideas on how to fix it, everyone around here would love to hear it who's interested in this site. And you can go to my Facebook page and add your thoughts there, John and everybody else.
Well, I couldn't help but go to look at Google Earth, because when we visited it during the Galena conference, I didn't know exactly where we were when you're out on a site on a road trip. So I looked and found it pretty readily. I also found the Potosi Brewery, which I remembered fondly. But I also noticed there was an old cemetery nearby, probably from, and I saw some pretty interesting historical pictures that purported to be the main drag of British Hollow. So there was a little bit more to the area than just the smelter ruin. And and it might, there might be some hope of having a little mini historic district or something there.
Well, I keep joking to Alan Van Natta that he is such an expert on this. I mean, he has collected every photo can ever find. For 30 years, he's collected these photos, or maybe he's pretty young, maybe 25 years, of this little village that grew up around the Craig furnace. Because the way it worked around here is you'd have mining camps. It didn't start out as a town. It started out because there's a mine and a smelter there. The mine and the smelter create a town. People come to live there to work at the smelter. Well, now somebody needs to eat. Now we've got a place to eat. Now they need supplies. Now we've got a supplier. Now they need people to wash their clothes. So we've got people moving in to do that kind of work. And pretty soon you've got a village. So British Hollow is like so many of our little mining camps that were all called mining camps at the time. And then a legitimate village grew up. Even Galena was like that. That is the second most popular tourist site in the state of Illinois, Galena, Illinois. And it started out as, Le Pointe, or the Fever River Settlement, it was called. It was just a mining camp with Muskogee Indians and a few French and Creole folks digging up lead. Yeah.
I remember riding in the bus and looking out the window at badger holes.
Badger huts. I'm going to correct you on that.
Okay. All right, badger
Only
huts.
because a badger hole is technically, in my parlance anyway, a hole that you dig to try to find some lead ore, and you fail, and so you still have a 6-foot deep hole. So some Southerners, who only came in the summer anyway, apparently use these holes to sleep in. However, what I discovered and wrote a paper on and got published in the Illinois State Journal magazine is a thing called badger huts. And these are actual stone arch buildings that you saw. You saw one of them. And that one belonged to a family that lived very close to my people on Council Hill. and they had one too. And we didn't go to that one because it's on private property and I don't have permission there. But yes, the badger huts. I did finally finish that paper and got it published. So I'm not looking around as much for badger huts anymore. I'm on to other things.
Tracy, actually, I think Johnny's recollection is in part right because we did go past an area up near the northwestern mine where there were a
Yes.
lot of divots, a lot of divots, which of course are also badger holes, although they were in Illinois. So I'm not
That's
sure if
right.
they were badger holes or sucker holes.
Yeah, sucker holes or badger holes, but then I just want to differentiate them from badger huts because those are actual buildings that are slightly subterranean and they're just so awesome and beautiful. And there's about a dozen left. And maybe I just need to put my focus on one or two of those and try to save those because those are also from the 1830s to 1850s period. And for Illinois and Southwest Wisconsin, that's really old for here. I know
I'm
you're
just glad I
Easterners.
remembered Badger.
Yes, pretty good. Good job. Good job.
But I
was
do remember
curious.
the British Hollow site because it's so aligned with what's in the Yorkshire Dales that
Yes.
I'm not a lead mining historian at all. I'm in the East, chrome and copper and other things, but I still know good mining history when I see it in good sites. And so I take advantage of trying to do what I can. And so the connection has been really enjoyable. And having been to that really nice conference that we had in 2013, and then trying to add on to it with my own knowledge. And so it's just watching the technology and the people migrate from one area to another
That's right. And chain
and
migration.
everything. That's what fascinates me.
I've been following that Yorkshire group because that's what my family was part of that group and came in 1834 to the lead mine district up here, where I'm located in Council Hill near Galena and near New Diggins, Wisconsin. So I've been following that group, and so I went back to a lot of the old church records from the 1700s to try to follow those families. So I've been following out about 8 or 9 different families that are definite lead mine district families in my area where I live now. And of course, they're all from the same villages in Yorkshire, like you were saying. So that chain migration is a really powerful thing to follow and super fun to try to study. Yeah.
I can't think of the author's name, but there's an excellent little paperback book called The Dalesmen of the Mississippi. I think it's called Dalesmen of the Mississippi.
Yes.
That covers that immigration and the impact of the Yorkshiremen in this district. It's really well done.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It also makes me think about the fuel because they were burning peat in Yorkshire, and I'm thinking they're probably using wood and maybe later coal in Wisconsin, Illinois. I'm not sure exactly, but I don't think they were burning peat. But peat is at the poor end of fuels.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I was in Ireland trying to get warm by a peat fire, and I can tell you that's the lower end, like you say. Yeah.
I think
Brian?
Brian,
Yep.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Tracy. I'm about an hour and a half south of you down in the Quad Cities, and I was actually hoping to take my students up to the British Hollow Smelter next year, and maybe we might forgo that. I actually just had a follow-up question, which I think you kind of answered in recently, which was like, how do we avoid this from happening again? I mean, you mentioned kind of like a friends group might have been an effective, pathway. And certainly I've seen, there's a old historic mansion down here, which, was almost given over to a private group and was going to be, heavily modified. And then a friends group in some ways is what saved it, right? I mean, it's still now owned by the city, but because the friends group is kind of funding restoration and activities, it seems to have been very effective. And I was wondering if is that like the best kind of model? Are there other kinds of models you could see to be able to do kind of more effective, preservation of some of these kinds of structures?
Well, bigger towns, like I live in Platteville, we have 12,000 people, and I'm on the commission for preservation. So we, look at all the historic buildings and, we have a monthly meeting and we try to decide if people are allowed to modify their buildings and things like that. So most towns have that. Galena, Illinois certainly does, even though that's only has, 3,400 people. So when you're out in the country, like the British Hollow Smelter, I think that the Potosi Historical Group probably was a good choice in the 80s, 90s, because they were active and they were doing a lot to help the smelter. And the emphasis at that time seemed to be in preservation. And John Bryan, with his 2004 study, seemed to, keep them motivated and moving in the right direction. But when we all lost our vision, or got busy, life happens. I think, and that organization, so many people aged out of the organization. Most of the people there are over 70 as well. So we need to make sure our organizations are functioning in the way they did before. Just because you have a good organization in 1995 doesn't mean by 2003 they're still effective. So I think what happened was the leader of this project kind of co-opted the group by offering to be the president, even though I don't know how involved he had been in the group prior to that. I'm not sure. But he suddenly was the president of the group, which means he was now the custodian of the very site that he was not preserving but reconstructing. So it became kind of a bunch of forces came together in a way that I don't think has been positive at all for this particular site. So yes, a friends group in the 90s when people are starting to age out would have been a really good and possibly effective way. And also having it on the state and national historic register back in the day when it wasn't that hard to do and there weren't 3 years of backlogs and things like there are now. We might have been able to get the owner, if he saw a tax break and saw the advantages, maybe we could have gotten it to happen, but we were too late. We're too late. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, no, and I mean, no, and I agree. I think it's so different when you don't have, certain governmental structures available, right? So, yeah, I certainly understand that. And I mean, I've also, when I was on a historic preservation commission down here, I also remember situations where there was something that was like on the national register, but because it wasn't on the city register, right? People were able to do whatever they wanted.
Right.
And like just no one had thought to put it on the city's, register because it was already such a well-known site. So
Right.
that part gets goofy and you're right. I think in some cases why you sometimes need these, I don't know, friends kinds of groups to function, to kind of cover in those cracks.
And you need money. I mean, you really do. If we'd had the money in the 2000s and someone had come forward with $50,000 for that engineering study to check how the hill is compromising the main chamber, if we had had money, to really do an updated study, because as great as John Bryan's study was of that site, he missed a few things. He didn't say, for example, where the wheel was. And that's still up for contention. Maybe Mark Langenfeld has studied that, but I'm not sure where the wheel was. I have two theories, but I'm not the expert. Other people are more expert than me. And we don't know some other things about the site. Like after John Bryan had done that study in 2004, Alan kept digging around and he found the trenches that were dug into the bedrock right behind where the person would have been standing who was puddling the lead ore in that furnace box. And it's just like, what is that for? Okay, well, is this the water that was taken away from the water wheel and then brought back to the river? Or is this, I've read something about slag furnaces. There's always a pit of water, but these were long trenches. And now they're covered up again because the guys working at the site didn't want to trip on them. And I get that. So they're covered up. So they're still there, of course, but they're covered in dirt. So there's so much more to be learned. At least I haven't learned it. Maybe somebody else understands it. I don't. I have questions. And now it's harder to ask those questions because the site has been altered. Anyway, sorry. I could go on, but I won't.
One thing I might try to chip in if I can, and this site's tough, and hopefully we, or especially you, Tracey, will help to be able to find ways to get it back on track and so forth. But, as going through this as an example, one thing that happens, like Mike, for example, was talking about a lot of them too, the sites that have totally disappeared. You'd have no idea anything was ever there. Well, one thing that most local government units have at this stage, frequently it's at a county level, for example, is some kind of a planning commission, some kind of a zoning group, land use ordinances, all this kind of stuff. There are opportunities with those groups, with those official groups, to try to establish a classification that is intended to recognize and hopefully preserve some of these historic mining sites. And it takes a little bit of work, but if you can build it into a zoning ordinance or a land use plan or a comprehensive plan, different places use different approaches to it, but somehow or other get it built into an official document as early as you can. Those things don't usually bring money, although sometimes if a person's looking for a grant, being able to quote say a county ordinance or a comprehensive plan that historic properties exist in this county or whatever the entity is, right? And that can then be used to supplement grant requests because, okay, now you've got some kind of official recognition of a place like this existing. I'll just throw that out. It involves our efforts. I know I get involved in that locally here in northern Minnesota too, but it involves a little bit of effort to get involved in those groups and to get some results. It doesn't happen overnight, but a lot of these sites are not exactly new either. But it does provide some recognition. It allows putting a line around things that, hey, before you permit a building or before you demolish something, think twice. And I'll just leave that for the time being.
That's good advice, especially because a lot of these sites are out in ghost towns now or rural areas. I mean, British Hollow is completely a ghost town. There's a few cornerstones left of a hotel, but there's not much to see. There is a badger hut there, more than one. That's still standing, but the rest of it's gone. So I think what you're thinking about is really good. Like I say, I kind of walk in. This happens to me a lot in life. I walk in thinking I'm going to help, and I end up not helping because people don't want my help, I guess. I don't know. But you know how it is? You walk into the fire and you don't even know you're in the fire until you're burning. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. Whoops. This isn't working out. So maybe that larger organization, Grant County itself or the township level or something, maybe that would be a way to talk to those folks. Maybe that's a good idea. Thank you.
Well, and then there's other ways, thinking about Brian taking a group of students out,
Yeah.
if you go into an academic institution, a lot of universities will have an architecture, landscape architecture. There's history departments, and that's fine too. But they'll also have architecture, landscape architecture type, disciplines. And they look for projects, they look for things, but they're at the spear point of coming up with uses for land and old buildings. Again, just making them aware of it, I guess, sensitizing them to the fact that there is something like this and it does have value.
Yeah, good thinking.
I think another potential part of the cautionary tale, and I'm treading on thin ice here, but is that in a sense you have to beware of energetic people, and it's a blessing and a curse, because if a person is energetic and brings great energy to a project, great enthusiasm to a project, that person better be taking that project in the right direction. And I think certain personalities, as Tracey pointed out, can basically sweep up a small organization and drag them along in their wake and overpower other opinions and so on.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, you love to have that kind of energy. Volunteers with that kind of energy and commitment are rare and jealously guarded, I would suppose. But if they're taking the project in a wrong direction, they're not doing you any favors.
Yeah, I was surprised that the Potosi Area Historical Society, that has really been the custodians of this site for so many decades, was more excited about progress. Didn't matter what kind of progress, but any progress was somehow better than doing it right. And I guess I have trouble understanding that, because I guess I don't think progress just for the sake of progress is the best idea. It's better to do it right, especially if you're going to actually start throwing cement on stuff that's hard to get off again, right? So, yeah. I really appreciate you inviting me to speak, Barbara. And this has been more emotional or kind of heartfelt for me than I realized. I guess, it's just another paper, it's another talk, it's something I'm interested in studying, but actually it does have I feel sad about this. And so thank you for hearing my sad ass story here.
Well,
You
thank
know,
you. And hopefully maybe if, maybe somebody who's attended today, if they can't learn something from it, once this is up on YouTube, maybe somebody will see it on YouTube in a year or two and be inspired to save whatever is local to them. So thank
that's
you.
great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So good to see you all again.
Thank you.